Hi, and welcome to Second Rate Film School. I'm Andrew.
I'm Jake.
And I'm Jacob. And from this point on, I will be the only one consistently talking for the rest of this commentary.
Yes, today we're doing Bionicle 2 Electric Boogaloo.
It's called Legends of Metru Nui, though for our first trivia fact, this was originally going to be called The Mask Maker. That was the title before they changed it. Just a nice little character-based title, in my opinion. Really implies the epic that's ahead of us.
No, so we're back. Obviously, we did our commentary track for Bionicle 1 Mask of Light. You can click the link below for that. Just a brief recap of our involvement with Bionicle. I had literally never seen anything Bionicle until we did that commentary track and only watched this movie for the first time last night. Jake?
Yeah. Wait, I thought we were talking about Hero Factory.
See, it's very frustrating to me. Like, it's a little frustrating to me because I think, for me personally, Bionicle is one of the most underrated sort of toy-based story franchises. I grew up seeing Transformers being very popular and stuff like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I actually don't know a ton about those, so I'm not trying to criticize them, but it always seemed like Bionicle had sort of a deeper lore and a deeper fundamental understanding of storytelling that kind of is ignored now just because the line, in retrospect, didn't have quite as much staying power. It was very popular back in the day, obviously, but we're not here to talk about that. It was just our summation. We're here to talk about this second Bionicle film.
Yeah, this came out in 03, right?
This came out in 2004.
04. Okay.
This is that's only important because this is an adaptation of the 2004 story, which was a prequel that was set before the first Bionicle film, and by extent, the first 3 years of Bionicle. But we're not here just to provide context. We're here to discuss the film. And so we got our opening here. And I think even here you can sort of see this obviously isn't quite Pixar, but they're really making the most out of the limited budget they probably had for a direct-to-DVD film in 2004.
Yeah, I said last night when we were talking about this, because, yeah, of course, you make the comparison to Pixar with the CGI, but I say, pound for pound in quality, I think this is probably better quality than any of the Disney, direct-to-video movies, with, maybe the exception of, Lion King 2, I thought had decent animation, though I haven't seen that in, 20 years, but it seems like whoever, Lego or the Weinsteins or whoever actually put the money into this, they put as much as possible into this, and it still looks pretty good for being nearly 20 years old.
Yeah, so this was, I believe Lego financed it. The production company in charge of it was Creative Capers, and then the animation studio itself was outsourced to another country. I believe it was Japan.
So we were talking about the animated commercials for the toys. How come they didn't animate this movie?
That's a good question. And I think part of it was because they were just like a commercial animation studio, and they wanted a company that had more of a understanding of film and storytelling and whatnot. And on the same token, they made the characters look different because they thought that making them look exactly like the toys would get distracting from a technical standpoint because they look like, you look at them for too long, they do look like plastic toys. And
okay.
If you were to light it, then lights would shine through all the holes in them and stuff.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I think they probably still could have done it or made it look a little closer, but I've come to appreciate the animation for what it is in this. Especially, I think this film has, a pretty damn good sense of atmosphere.
Yeah.
And I think you talked about it a little last night, Jake, but the art design of the city is pretty unique.
Yeah. No, I will say, I'm not the biggest fan. I had some of the toys as a kid, but I consider myself more of an outsider. But shots like this, I love. I love the more organic look to it. It hasn't. I should say primitive. I think that's the operative word.
Yeah,
I kind of like the simplicity of that primitive look. I think it's a little more interesting personally than the stuff in the first movie. But that's just a personal thing.
I think it's unique is this is sort of a futuristic city, but they give it a lot of organic elements.
Mm-hmm.
You still have these carvers working in the desert. You have a lot of water and weather elements.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff's made of stone, I notice. There's always been an interesting contrast with Bionicle's art style, where the characters are robots but the actual elements and world they live in is sort of a real world stone sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought it to this city, which could have just been like a cyberpunk type environment.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed the look of the cities as well. I'm still as my second.
I'm sorry. This was the part last night I said we had to. So you'll notice here, Vakama has a little helper. And I've looked into it because that little helper thing wasn't a set, and it was a minor fascination of mine as a child. And I found out that is actually a model of a Borak, which was one of the action figures. And they took the head off it, shrunk it, and just had it walking around.
Yeah.
And because you look at it, it's the only thing that doesn't look like the rest of the stuff. It looks like one of the Bionicle toys.
Mm-hmm.
It's not stylized like all the other characters. And they just took a CGI model of a Borak Lego set, took the head off, and had it walking around there.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think I read that on some of the trivia.
Yeah, I think that goes into the almost scrappiness, no pun intended, since they're kind of in a scrapyard, of this franchise that's like, they're trying to use everything they can. And it's like, you can feel the heart in this. Like I said, I never watch anything Bionicle, really. I had a couple of the McDonald's toys just incidentally, but that's about it. But watching the first one and this one, it's like, these are like actually like really like well-made children's movies. Confusing to me, but...
Speaking of confusing, so hear that line there. He tells the one assassin, "You lost the right to call me brother long ago." And so here's a little fun fact to make things even more confusing for everybody. That assassin with the spider legs, Nidiki, in the extended lore, he was a Toa. So to boil it all down, there was a big war thousands of years before this movie, and Nidiki and Likan, who is the Toa we see here, were allies, and they were fighting against the Dark Hunters in this big war. And Nidiki was sort of the Benedict Arnold of the whole thing, and he betrayed them. But the Toa ended up winning the war, and they banished him, and he ended up, through related circumstance, getting mutated into this monster. And that's why...
Much like Benedict Arnold did.
Yes, it's very similar. And that's why he calls him brother briefly here. So it's, you know what it is? It's one of those things. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings, or Star Wars, actually. I know that's like the go-to example with any franchise, but you don't need to know all these details to get the basic story they're telling. The story is pretty straightforward. It's like kind of a hero's journey, from nobody to legend.
Yeah, these things just add to what's already there.
Yes.
They enhance what's already there, which is already, I think, a pretty solid story in this movie.
I love these dream sequences.
Looks like the PC and the Mac commercial from the early 2000s.
This is where they really, again, there's like kind of a sense of artistry to this, where they aren't just showing toys walking around fighting each other or talking. There's like kind of a real vision to the fundamental visual storytelling there. We'll get into it later. I don't think it all totally coalesces, but it's pretty interesting, and I think it's kind of a unique choice for something like this.
Yeah, it's all made to be like a movie, which they could have, half-assed it and been like, oh, it's just a commercial. We just got to use this to sell toys, but there's an actual artistry to this, which not everybody would have done at the time.
I give credit to the Bionicle story team for coming up with a lot of this, because I guess not coming up with like the story, because I guess like when the filmmakers came into this, the story was basically already outlined for them. But I give the filmmakers credit for having a directorial vision to it, and that actually, I think that gets stronger in this film compared to the last one. And I would argue it's even stronger in the next one.
So you say the third one has the best executed story and structure?
I would say this one has the best story and structure. However, the third one is interesting, almost a little deconstructionist, and I think has the strongest directorial vision in terms of how it's directed.
Okay.
But no, I think this movie has a pretty solid structure and story to it.
Just saying here, this robot who just said mask maker, now I have Matchmaker from Fiddler on the Roof stuck in my head, and I really would like to see Fiddler on the Roof acted out by Bionicles instead. So, Jacob, get on that.
Who would be the fiddler?
That implies I know any of their names.
It would be Makuta, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
With that voice.
I will say, even though
That
I don't,
gravelly, chocolatey voice.
I will say, even though I don't know any of the names here, like this is why I realize I'm an adult. Like I'm a dad now. That I'm like, oh yeah, those robots that like fight each other. Like I don't know their names. I enjoy it still. I'm just very confused. Maybe if I watch this like a few more times, I would understand.
I still don't know the names either. I can't keep them straight in my head. It's one of those things that I was thinking about when I was doing research on this today, and I was getting lost after 5 minutes. We were talking about this last night, but I think there needed to be a more unified thing to just bind all this stuff together, like a TV show, like Transformers or something. And then you could still have all this stuff, like all like the books and the comics and the video games and everything, but I think there need to be more centralized thing as like a conduit for all this mythology, and I think a television structure would have probably fit that best.
You know what the thing is? Because I agree with you, but the books were that.
Mm-hmm.
If you read the books, you got the whole story.
Yeah.
The problem is, I just don't think doing books was the most accessible way of telling
Yeah.
it. And I know it's like a little cynical to say that kids would have rather watched TV than like go and seek out a book and read it from start to finish. Unfortunately, I think that's the reality, especially with this target demographic. I think if it was a TV show, it probably would have been a little bit more accessible, because then you can just turn on the TV and watch it instead of having to go to a bookstore and like read a book. And as a kid who liked reading, I enjoyed that, but I understand that.
See, I did too, but I had no idea of the existence of these books. And for me, my exposure was just these toy lines that would come out every 6 months, and I just got more confused by them, and I got more alienated. So I think a show would have helped, because, you know, whether you love reading or not, TV is kind of still the thing that everyone does. I mean, like you said, it'd be more accessible, but I think that's what should have happened. Otherwise, I think this franchise would have lasted a lot longer.
Yeah, I think Bionicle was just ahead of its time, doing like the cross media between the books. You then had comics online, games, movies, shit like that. That, even though, like you said, the books got the majority of the storytelling through, that it's a little also then difficult for a newcomer to like, okay, I got to go track down all X amount of these books, in the era before Amazon was really big, and like, what was the, secondary market on eBay like type thing.
Legos were expensive too. Like that, it felt like we were obligated to keep up with the toys, even though I know there are other options, but the problem was we weren't aware of those options. So it was just, it kind of faded after a couple of years for me. It was something I wish I would have stayed with, because if I did, I'd probably be more like you, Jacob, with this, because it's all very interesting once you dig into it and understand it.
And that's a cautionary tale, by the way.
Well, the thing is, it's like any great mythology, like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. Like it's the same thing. It just I didn't do as good of a job of maintaining that kind of that unified, that unified sense that those other franchises have.
It's like a unified way of understanding it.
Yeah.
It is like if you read the books, you got the whole thing. But the books were, hard to track down, and they were hard to find, and you didn't know about them. But and what's interesting is that the movies, because there was always like a level of canon too, and this is getting into like the nerdy shit that doesn't really matter.
Sorry, this is now getting into the nerdy shit.
But yeah, the stuff that doesn't matter, I should say, because it's like there was like degrees of canon.
Yeah.
Where like certain things, like certain events would be portrayed more than once over the course of like a year. Like the comics and the books and the movies would each show like the same scene from a different like medium standpoint, but they would be slightly different. Usually as a result of the artist like messing something up in the comic, or the writer changing something. And so they would have to sort out what was canon, what was not from there. But what was interesting was, because the movies were considered the most accessible form of media, whatever appeared in the movie, at least initially when it came out, was considered to be true canon, and anything that contradicted that was inherently wrong. But then later they changed that, because the movies, they stopped making them, and that's when good old Greg Farshidi, the writer of the Bionicle books, could come in and start cutting out the stuff he didn't like from the movies, which we'll get into later when we get to a specific scene that Greg deemed non-canon.
Yeah.
Again, this is all interesting, but from a kid's perspective, following that, like that's It's nearly impossible.
Yeah, that's more interesting from like a meta perspective.
Yeah.
though.
Yeah.
Like in terms of the mythology, I mean, it wasn't like anything too crazy. It was normally stuff that just like weirdos that follow this too closely. Not that I know any. Would pick out like, why is this disc a different color, or why is this mask a different color in the comic than in the movie? And then William Shatner would come out and tell you to get a life.
Have any of you ever kissed a girl before? We're 9, Mr. Shatner.
There's Mivok, who was the pet bird / spy of the Turaga, and it always drove me crazy because he looks very different from his toy.
It's a different color, right?
Yeah, because it was like I had that set, and it was a menacing-looking black and silver bird, and here it's like multicolored.
So, quick question for you. When you keep saying set, do you mean just like a figure, or it came like with a play set as well?
So like if you, it was like a set. They made Bionicle play sets later on in the future, but not at this point.
Okay, so literally just a figure. Okay.
So here actually, so what we're seeing here, the search for the Great Discs, is like a quick montage in this movie. This was actually the first half of the Bionicle story for 2004, and they just sum it up in like a minute here, which is very well done for what it is. But it was very the way they released these sets were they released the Toa sets in the first half of the year, and just the Toa, along with the Matorn sets. But I don't want to confuse you guys more, so I'm just going to leave that out. And then all the other sets of all the other characters, the Vaki, which were the security guards, the Dark Hunters, Turaga Duma, all of them were released like in the summer. So they needed a story that could just involve the Toa before getting into the other stuff because the sets weren't out yet.
Well, I read that in that montage there's a reason why they're not using their Toa powers in this movie, and it's because their energy was depleted in that storyline.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. So I like that because like noticing in hindsight, finding that out, it's a little more interesting. They don't have their powers. They have to rely more. It's more character based, and it relies more on kind of looking within themselves and this sense of self discovery than using their powers as like a crutch. It suits a good origin story too for what these characters are going through.
And then correct
Ups the
me.
stakes as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
And I agree.
And then correct me for this. And then the reason why they don't use their powers in this is because they haven't discovered their disc power yet, or what's it called? That we see that happening throughout the movie, where like flashlight.
Oh, the mask
rings,
powers.
The mask powers.
Yeah.
Okay, so
We'll get to that later, I guess.
Yeah, but regardless, they don't have their powers. But in the comic, it was depleted. In this, they just hadn't discovered them yet, and that's an example of things being different.
The Toa
continuities.
powers were different from the mask powers. So like the whole thing with Toa were they were like an element. You got the fire Toa, the red guy. You had the ice Toa, the white guy, and they had elemental powers. The fire guy could shoot fire, but you notice they never do that in this. They never use those powers. And the books explained that it was because their powers had been depleted by this earlier story where they found the Great Discs. Now, I personally, there's always the conspiratorial side of me that was like the filmmakers just forgot.
Mm-hmm.
Like the comic writer and like the story team was like, well, why don't we explain that? Kind of like a classical retcon.
Yeah.
But whatever it is, see, and again, this is like, I think Bionicle, the story team and Greg Farsting and the filmmakers like understood the fundamentals of storytelling and how to make these things interesting and character-based.
Yeah.
I really like Gerard Plunkett, that's the guy's name, that does the voice of Turaga Duma. I really like his performance in this. It's very maniacal.
Well, so he's playing Makuta,
Yeah.
pretending to be this character. Yeah.
Yes. And this is a cool little
I read
set piece.
I read this. I think one of the writers, he was like really into like extreme sports or like surfing, and he used one of these obstacles. I think it's like a wave thing or something like that, but it related to his fear of waves.
I think I saw that on IMDb.
Yeah.
So here's my question.
I don't know if that's true or not.
That's the thing. So I went to look up the IMDb for this, just like to do some quick research, and there's like a ton of trivia listed under the IMDb page. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Like much more than you would get for an average movie, which makes me think there was like 2 or 3 like Bionicle fans that just went and posted a ton of stuff. So
Yeah, that's the thing you see with these. Like when you go on like these wikias or IMDb's for these things, it's either it's barren or someone who has a lot of time post everything about it.
You should, you ever want to have a fun night, go look up the Bionicle Wall of History.
Oh boy.
Where these fans wrote the entire Bionicle mythology from like the beginning of Bionicle time to when the story ended. And it's just pages and pages of text.
See, I can appreciate that because it's like any fan base, really. People who get very passionate, maybe a little obsessive about it. But again, if this had a more unified means of holding everything together, I know we kind of tease it and everything, but it's like any other franchise if you think about it. It just everything was just more disparate.
Yeah,
I think disparate's the key word here.
It would be it's great having a bunch of really diehard, super loyal fans, but you would rather have, I think, 1 million average fans. That makes it a little bit more profitable, but it's still nice. It's got to make the makers of it be like, oh, wow, even 20 years later almost, our stuff is still beloved. So there are consolations to this, too.
I wish this stuff was sort of more, like, remembered. Like, there was more staying power to just this, because I think I keep comparing it to like that 1980s animated Transformers film in my head, and I watched that, and like there's like a big cult audience for that, and I certainly don't mean to insult anyone that likes it. I kind of understand the appeal, but I don't think it's very good. I think it's pretty corny for what it is, and obviously is just taking a lot of narrative shortcuts to justify bringing in a new toy line. And it's not to say I can't enjoy it in like a corny way or just like even appreciate some of the stuff it does well, but I think these films are much better made, both in terms of the writing and in terms of the technical execution.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, obviously they came out like decades apart, but for the technology at the time that they had compared to the technology at the time that they had, like in context, I think this is still better made.
Well, and you're not even like saying like better made from like literal like standpoint of animation errors or stuff like that. You're talking about like a storytelling, which it doesn't matter whether it was written in 1988, 1888, or 2021. Like the story could still be well done. And I haven't watched all the Transformers animated movies, but it's like I could, from the clips I've seen and reviews I've seen, it's competently made, whether from a technical standpoint. And again, watching this for the first time, it's like these are like well made and like very good children's movies that I think hold up, and this is coming from someone who has literally zero nostalgia for this brand.
Just look at this scene we just watched where the statue falls down. Now if that was like a more straightforward like kids cartoon or something, they would have just shown the statue fall down from like a medium wide shot, but here it's like the build up as you follow the disc hit the statue, and then the close up of the statue falling down as the birds fly out from behind it. And there is sort of a sense of scale and scope and cinematography that I think helps set it apart even just a little bit.
But this shot just reminds me of Attack of the Clones.
I was about to say that, actually. I was thinking that same thing.
Yeah. Where's Count Dooku? Get him.
We have to get to that hangar.
Occasionally, I mean, it's different because it has an organic feel, but I get slight Coruscant vibes from Metru Nui.
It looks just as realistic as what we saw in the prequels.
Well, speaking of Metru Nui,
Buzzing!
I read that...
Never speak bad faith to the prequels here.
So, speaking of Metru Nui, I read that this all takes place inside a cave, if I'm... Okay.
So, here was...
The design changed, though. It used to be like an underground, like really cavernous, dark cave, but then they changed the design of it, where this is still in a cave, but it's... Well, I guess you can go in a little more in depth of it.
Yeah, basically... To boil it down into one sentence, Metru Nui exists in a giant cavern that's underneath the island from the first movie.
Okay, yeah.
And that was a big mystery, like, for a while. Why is Metru Nui in this big cavern underneath the city? And it turns out it's because Metru Nui is inside the giant Mata Nui robot. Mm-hmm. And Mata Nui, which was the island from the first one, was on top of the robot. It was like a real island. Mm-hmm. And that's me trying to sum it up in the least confusing way possible without bringing any of that context in.
No relation.
No, I get it.
Yeah, it was like, again, there was like a mystery to this whole thing.
So, Jacob, can you explain this? So, we know this character is actually Makuta. So, why is he talking to himself?
Yeah, I cannot explain.
Okay.
No, this was like sort of a point of discussion I remember back in the day.
Yeah, that's
everybody was like, why is he talking to Makuta?
It's a bit of a cheat.
You You know what? I wonder what might have happened.
What?
I wonder if the decision changed at one point.
Yeah.
Like maybe, and this is, I have no evidence. This is totally conspiratorial. Maybe at one point during filmmaking, Turaga Duma was working for Makuta, and they filmed the scene, and then they changed it, and they didn't have time to change the scene. You can justify it and say he's talking to himself. But.
Well, I mean, if they had to do that,
not that external.
If they did that with the Michael Bay Ninja Turtles movie, where originally William Fichtner was supposed to be Shredder, but then they're like, oh, that's kind of like racist if we do that, and then they just like shoot a couple scenes with him talking to this guy in shadows, and that's literally what they did with that movie. So I can buy Lego being like, no, let's change it. We don't have enough money to go back and redo that scene. Just whatever.
That's, again, there's no evidence of that. It could be completely wrong. That's my conspiratorial thought behind it, because I don't understand what's supposed to be happening there otherwise.
It could have just been a thing where if they had to fix it, maybe they just see the guy coming and he's like talking to himself, and they're like, oh, what's wrong? Oh, nothing. It could have just been that.
They should have done it like the first Spider-Man with Willem Dafoe. Follow the chill up your spine, Makuta.
Yeah, maybe it could have made it, I don't know, fuck it.
But it's like, it's because Makuta in these movies monologues to himself already.
Yeah.
So it's like, I just could have done that again.
Yeah, okay.
Love this action scene.
Yeah.
Love the idea of this chute system that transports everything throughout the city.
Yeah, this is cool.
Slicing through the water.
Like that shot there is great. And I actually kind of like this stuff where they're just like stuck in the prison.
Mm-hmm.
It almost reminds me of like the Karate Kid in a weird way, where he's making them do the weird tasks and stuff. Where it's like put the blindfold on and carry the rock in circles.
I thought you meant like I'm like, I don't recall this scene where Daniel goes to prison in the first Karate Kid movie. Was that in part 3?
I think the story with the other 3 is slightly stronger than this, but I still appreciate the sort of more scaled down character elements of the 3 hanging out in prison.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's the guy that when he appeared, everybody as a kid was like, what's that? And they checked their Lego magazines frantically. And, what? Because that was not a set.
So were you like screaming at your parents, Mom, Dad, we missed one?
No, we're just like, what? That wasn't in the catalog.
I'm just imagining Jacob being like Kathy Bates in Misery, like when she's describing going to the zero, and she just like stood up and screamed, "No, it's wrong." That would have been Jacob screaming about this.
My parents would have punished me immediately, and yet also been completely baffled by whatever I was talking about if I tried doing anything like that.
He wasn't cock-a-doodle-doo Bionicle.
Oh my god.
Stick around for my Misery commentary, folks. No, I do agree. I prefer the first one because I like the scaled down cast, but I think I do like the upping the ante and like all the different set pieces we get here, from like the water base tunnel, the prison, this ice fortress, which I like. We get in a second, like you see like a propaganda poster on the support beam. It's like, oh, that's weird that they included that where presumably no one would ever see it, but okay.
Yeah, this is all just part of the fun adventure structure there to really service the hero's journey.
I love the authoritarian vibes that you get from Turaga Duma and the Baki, and that was emphasized in the commercials even more, where it was like a Big Brother sort of thing.
Like
but I love
1984.
like like you said, the propaganda posters, and I love those television screens that show him while he's talking.
Okay. It took me years to discover the Green Bionicle was air.
Seems like it should be like a jungle, right?
I know it was changed in like the reboot, but still, I feel like a couple of those Bionicles it might be a little redundant. Because stone and earth, I mean, come on.
Yeah, I guess a little.
Yeah, you gotta make a few more toys, guys. Come
even
on.
ice and water.
No,
that's
those
okay
are
with
too
it.
different. I will
that's
give you
okay.
Earth and Rock are bullshit. Now, see, and this goes into with Avatar, my gripe with that show. I really wish, and I guess you can't do this with children's properties, but I wish like you would see them use their powers like in more fucked up ways, like the air power, like you just like suck the air out of like someone's lungs to kill them. Like, do you think they could do that on Nickelodeon?
That happened in Bionicle. That actually happened in a book. I think we were talking about it when we watched it, called Time Trap, which was the book that was written that took place after the events of this movie, but before the last scene of this movie. I'm sure you're very curious to know, but we do have to continue with the
Yes.
commentary,
Yeah.
guys.
Yes.
So I'll tell you about it after.
Let's be honest, if you're listening to this commentary, you're not like me. You're more like Jacob, knowing everything about this.
You're already in. Oh, hold on. I'm getting a text from someone. I'm just going to tell them that I'm watching Bionicle 2 for the second time in one weekend.
Yeah, my mom called me just a minute ago, and I had to be like, I don't care what's going on with your personal life on Mother's Day. I'm watching Bionicle 2. And she's like, okay, son.
For the second time in a weekend.
Second time in 24 hours, too.
Shh, don't say that part.
I think the ship has sailed on that.
No. See, watching this, I felt like this would be a good plot for a Star Wars movie or something. I mean, I'm glad this is its own thing and it's doing that, but it's the type of stuff I'd like to see with these new Star Wars movies.
This is
You
better
mean
than Rogue.
creativity and expanding the universe?
Yes.
I actually, this is probably my favorite dream sequence in the whole thing. This whole thing, this nightmarish vision he gets of these like canisters, and then it cuts and it shows the empty one. And then as the movie continues, you see like the canisters like mysteriously appearing in different locations they're visiting. It's like it's great foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was super confused by what was going on last night, and even knowing what the movie's ending is, I still am confused.
No, I understand it.
No, yeah,
I will say I think the one, I mean, you know, I think this movie is good, but we are grading it a little bit on a curve because it is like a direct-to-DVD toy-based movie, but it's much better than most of its ilk. But
Yeah,
I will
yeah.
say, if I'm going to point out any flaw, I think the villain's plan is not made very clear. I think it's a little confusing. And I like that they don't just have him say what it is, they try and show it visually by having that grand culmination of all the visions at the end, but it still doesn't totally make sense if you don't have outside context, like from the books and stuff.
Yeah, and I will say, even though like we're grading it a little bit on a curve. Again, like I said earlier, this is better than like any of the like direct-to-video Disney movies, more or less. Like I'm really struggling to think of any of them that I liked, you know, even back in the day more than I like this now as an adult.
Let's be honest, this is better than a couple of the recent Pixar movies.
I agree.
Yeah.
There's like
Yeah,
a Disney
yeah.
sniper on you right now.
No, I this.
You
No,
know, it's
There's a lot of heart in this, and I think that comes from Lego trying to carve out a chunk of the children's brand more than just, hey, put a few of our blocks together and use your imagination. This is like when they were really ramping up like expensive sets. This is when they were starting to do the video games and all that. So it's like it's very clear they're putting their heart into this, like really trying to gain a foothold.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm curious, how much say did the Lego company have over these movies? Did they give them a lot of free reign, or was it more controlled?
my understanding is that they basically came in and told them what the story was.
The Lego company?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like it was the Bionicle story team. Also,
The Bionicle.
there's the foreshadowing I was talking about.
Okay.
But yeah, basically, the way the Bionicle story worked was each year the Bionicle story team would come up with the story for that year from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I guess according to the filmmakers, when they came in for this one, like the story was basically outlined for them already, and they just worked from there.
Okay. Well, I meant like higher ups. Like, were there any people from like the marketing department or just the more money people? Do they have their hands on any of this stuff?
It's not totally clear to me because there's not a ton of behind the scenes stuff with it. But I think basically Lego was on the same page with all the Bionicle stuff at this point.
Okay.
In terms of editorial interference, you'll get that more in the next movie.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we got a Spider-Man trilogy situation on our hands, I guess.
It's different. You know what's funny is that it wasn't higher up stuff. It was disagreements over the direction the story should have gone in.
Oh, okay.
The reason this was supposed to be the only year that took place in Metru Nui in the prequel era, and they stretched it out an extra year because they liked the world so much that they built that they felt like it would have been a waste not to do anything else with it. And so they stretched the story out an extra year by telling an interquel that takes place between the second to last scene and the last scene of this movie, and there were disagreements in the story team about what they should have done with that.
Yeah. I'm interested in all this too, but couldn't they have just done a story about the Toa before these? Oh, wait, these are the first Toa. Weren't they?
Well, the guy at the beginning.
Well,
was
the
a
guy at the beginning, but wasn't he in a group, or did the other people get killed off?
There's lots of Toa before that, but I think the idea maybe they wanted to continue the story moving forward, because after the 2005 story, which is the third movie, they cut back to the end of the third film, and it went back to the present day, and it was about because the first film ends with them rediscovering Metru Nui, and it was about them all returning to the city, and that was sort of where it went. But then the actual events of that story took place on a third new island that they came up with, and there were only minor elements of that took place on Metru Nui.
Okay. Yeah.
Right, Andrew?
Eyes glazing over.
Yeah, I just love all this stuff.
It's very interesting, and I can see the words make me want to go to sleep, but the ideas I can get behind.
It's the names. I for me, that's the only thing about this that's a little alienating to me. I still can't keep it straight. But other than that, I can
wacky names.
Well, I still can't tell you the names of any of these fucking people. Don't ask me. I don't know them.
We watched this like 12 hours ago, and I still can't tell you the names. There's a moment later on where like, what was the phrase that was used? And I'm like, what is that? And like Jacob had to like look at me. It was like, what do they call the little robots?
Oh, Matorn.
Yeah, I'm like, what's the Matorn?
The main robots in the movie.
Yeah, he's like, what? They say the Matorn. I'm like, wait, what's the Matorn? And like Jacob looked at me, not sure if I was joking or not, or like, no, if I'm like this, like out of the loop on it.
For context, we're watching this with subtitles on, and still the names are throwing us all for throwing the two of them for a loop. I know all the names.
Jacob actually has all these names tattooed on his like forearm.
Yeah, see, tall Matorn. That's what they thought the Toa were, because they're beasts and they don't quite understand what the culture is.
Yeah, I know the Toa and the Matorn. And
hey, that's a good start.
Makuta.
It's close. It's Makuta.
Makuta.
Which is the McDonald's one.
I always used to get what's it from Samurai Jack? Aku.
Oh,
Aku,
his name confused with Makuta, because I could never remember the Samurai Jack character because I was such a big Bionicle fan. Which, weirdly enough, there was like a cross promotion when Samurai Jack premiered. That was when they started premiering the Bionicle commercials. I think it was like a thing where they were like, the Samurai Jack premiere has been brought to you by Bionicle or something.
This is like, what, 2001 then? Had it been? Okay. Yeah, I like shots like that. A lot of the vistas, which looks like a Western.
I think the directors actually said that they wanted to focus on like greater expanse, and they said greater vistas.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, again, can't say it enough. Like, it's a very well-made movie. Like, yeah, you could say, oh, it's not the greatest CGI, but it's like, okay, you know, like, you look at Toy Story 1, it's not the greatest CGI, but it's still, like, the second best Toy Story movie. Like, that's still pretty impressive, and, like, this is, like, really well-made for, like, what it was and what the budget probably was as well.
There's, like, animation errors you can pick out. One thing that always interested me that I never noticed was that apparently when the characters stop moving, they just revert back to their their whatever their normal phases or their normal posture. So they'll just stand there once their scripted movement is done. Now, I've never personally noticed that, but there might be people with a more keen eye than I that have spotted that.
Yeah, I didn't notice anything like too overtly major. This isn't like the original Ninja Turtles cartoon where like colors of masks like swap or something like that.
Nothing like that. Great shot here.
Yeah.
Was it one of you guys said last night it was like Be Prepared, or was I watching something else that someone compared Be Prepared
That was the
to?
night that we were watching Good Burger.
Oh, yeah.
That was a totally different movie.
So you guys can't remember the names of like any of the characters in Bionicle. I cannot remember any of the characters' names from these Nickelodeon things.
Well, you didn't
It always
watch them.
confused me. Well, no, I mean in general.
Oh.
You don't remember Dexter from Kenan and Kel? Or from Good Burger, I mean?
I genuinely didn't know there was a character with that name.
Yeah,
I
that
didn't
was
know either.
That was Keenan's name in Good Burger.
I'm talking about like all the Nickelodeon live action stuff. I didn't watch a ton of, so
Look,
I couldn't keep track.
I know there was a lot of them, Jacob, but at least their names were Josh and Sam. Not.
The weirdest name on any of those shows was Gibby.
Yeah.
But hey, let's focus here. They're discovering their mask powers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like mind fucking this guy.
Yeah, so the Onewa, the Toa stone, has telepathy where you can control your mind. And then Nuju, who is the Toa of Ice, has telekinesis, and he can move stuff with his mind. And so it's a little confusing because they're kind of similar.
Yeah, because he was able to control the guy to like sit down, so he was able to move him with his mind. I suppose you could argue that that one has only mental powers over organic, like living people, and then the other one only has powers over inanimate objects. Potentially, could be the difference.
Now here's a fun little fact. Those are the Vaki. And they were 6 different kind of Vaki that you could get, and they only show 2 of them in the movie. They showed the blue ones and they showed the brown ones.
Mm-hmm.
So that's either restraint on their part, or they just they didn't have time to fit them in.
Yeah. Maybe get a little confusing with. There's a uniformity to them that helps you kind of understand, just in this one shot with them.
Yeah.
Makes them. Yeah, I mean,
that's the equivalent of like the troop builder figures that you would see like in like Star Wars, like with the toys and all that. That's like, it was designed to like, hey kids, pony up a little extra dough, but like there wasn't a necessity for them to have as many in the movie itself. So it is a little restraint on the storytelling department that we're not going to try and cram every fucking toy we're selling in here, and I can admire that. That they're like, if kids want to buy it, they'll buy it.
Same. I feel the same way.
Because this legitimately does not like. I know it literally was a commercial to sell toys when you really get down to why it was made, but like it doesn't feel like the Transformers movie, like you said. From what little I've seen, like the few scenes I've seen of them, like, oh, this is exclusively to get us to buy new toys.
Exactly. So let's talk about the mask powers here. I think one thing, and I know their hands were kind of tied with this, but I would have liked to see the mask powers sort of correspond with the characters' traits a little bit more in their arcs. Now their hands were kind of tied here because they weren't able to choose what the mask powers were. It was like these characters existed before they made this movie and already had these mask powers, and they had to fit them into the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple moments I noticed they try and do that, like with Wanua with the flashlight power. They say like something at one point earlier in the movie, like you can't see what's ahead of you or something like that, like in a symbolic sense. And I think that was their way of trying to make his power like a literalization of his small character journey.
yeah.
It's like the Fantastic Four. Reed, you're stretching everywhere. Sue, you don't get seen. I'm just describing the first Fantastic Four movie.
I haven't seen that in years. Or we're talking about the
not the
story
Corman one. No, the 2000 like whatever one with Jessica Alba. Like they literally say that in there. Like they have Reed being like, it makes perfect sense. It's like, Johnny, we're always saying you're such a hothead. Sue, you always feel like you're not being seen. I'm stretching everywhere. And then like he pauses for a second with like Ben, and it's like, and you're a rock now.
I will say I do admire that at least structurally they fit in the reveal of the mask power as well. I like that Vakama's the last one to figure it out, but he realizes it at the moment that his mentor passes away, and it's actually a pretty powerful moment, even if invisibility doesn't have much to do with his character arc.
Yeah,
I think the only other one that
I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool.
I think the only other one that, to me, like from what little I know about this, fits in is the white ice one. Like, isn't he like a librarian? Like they say, oh, librarians don't know how to do this, and it's like, oh, okay, he can control shit with his mind. That kind of works.
He's a librarian. He loves astrology and books, so he can move stuff with his mind.
Am I wrong? Am I thinking of a different character?
No, you know
was
what?
That another plot point from Good Burger? I'm confusing.
You kind of have to stretch. I can to quote Reed Richards or whatever. I guess Matau, I can kind of appreciate that his shape-shifting powers allow him to be kind of mischievous, which fits with his character. That's like the one. But again, like you got to stretch, like Ian Griffad to figure that out.
Groford, star of 102 Dalmatians.
Is that wrong-looking Nevok?
Yeah. Which, going back to 102 Dalmatians, the main topic of this video, I remember as a kid I was begging my sister to like take me to like rent that movie at Blockbuster, And she's like, wait, I thought it was 101 Dalmatians. I'm like, yeah, they made another one. They find another Dalmatian. That was how I summed up that movie.
Andrew's also doing anything he can to talk about something else at this point.
All those dogs are dead now.
All right, so now we have. Oh, I guess Tragaduma is Makuta. I thought they were working together, but I guess they're the same person. And that's the thought process when you're watching the movie.
That's my thought process now, to be perfectly honest. I remember, like, Jake gasped last night when we were watching this. I'm like,
Well, because it was our first connection to the first movie.
Yeah.
There's the character because I showed this to you guys, and I was like, this is a standalone movie. It takes place many years before the first one. Don't worry about how it connects. It'll all make sense at the end. Would you guys say it did?
I remembered everything.
Yeah, so it was kind of like it's interesting because as a Bionicle fan, you watch this and you're like, it's like, a prequel thing. You know where it's all going, at least to some extent. Like, these guys are going to become the elderly robots from the first movie, and they're going to end up on this other island, and Makuta's the villain. But as people with no context for that, was it like kind of an aha moment at the end?
Yeah, it was.
I will say with Makuta, I remembered the villain from that. I didn't remember the mask, so that really changes the mask. That meant nothing to me. I was just confused. I'm like, wait, is that gonna give him a new power? I didn't realize that was what Makuta looked like or whatever. So it made sense enough for a layman who literally this is the second time has watched anything Bionicle related. I got it enough. When you see him transform in the end, I'm like, okay, and then see the other characters. I'm like, okay, I got it.
Yeah, that's one of those interesting things that I, as a Bionicle fan, never really considered until, showing it to people who weren't as familiar. Oh, and we got our reveal here that Lee Khan was the mysterious Turaga in the prison.
Yeah, these Bionicle movies, I realized I described as body horror when you really get down to it. You can't go through puberty until you go through it all at once, and then when you get weakened, you literally turn into an elderly man who needs a cane immediately. Otherwise, you're it's seemingly, from my point of view, almost invincible. Unless someone actually kills you, it seems like you're immortal. Which this seems like a fucking hellscape of a world to live in, from that perspective.
I think
because I'm also Catholic,
this is
so
splitting
this
hairs. But I want to say in the original books and comics, the Turaga were actually stronger than the Matorns still. And they just made them more like old people in these movies. Funny you say body horror. Wait till we get to the third one. I mean, they're robots, but there's a lot of stuff with mutation and turning into monsters in the next one.
That's interesting because these things
Coming
aren't
soon, by
quite
the way.
organic.
No, they're robotic.
Aren't they cancer?
What?
I was making a joke reference to apparently the inspiration for Bionicle was cancer.
It was, yeah.
What?
The guy who came up with the concept for Bionicle, Christian Faber, came up with the idea when he was undergoing treatment for a brain tumor.
Oh.
Yeah, this was he had this idea when he was going through chemo of sending all these little robots in to fight the tumor, and that was sort of where the big concept of Bionicle came in, which is they're all nanobots serving this giant robot.
So that was there from the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay.
I give Lego credit.
Yep.
They had the direction of the story planned out since the start of the line.
Yeah, I can't say that about Transformers.
Yeah.
You can't say that about the prequels or the sequel trilogy either.
You mostly can't say it about the sequel trilogy. See,
shit,
we
Ryan
need the
Johnson's never
Bionicle
coming
story
on.
team to write the story for the next Star Wars trilogy.
Why the hell not?
Yeah. I just bring in Greg Farshidi, who's not going to outline anything. And,
Oh, jeez.
And have this crazy thing. That's Greg Farshidi, who's actually, I actually think he's a pretty good writer, and he's a very insightful guy if you listen to interviews with him. But he had an interesting way of writing where he would never outline anything, and he would encourage kids not to because he thought it would encourage them to write more. Because he always thought that if you outline, then you're letting your plot dictate things rather than your characters.
Well, I do not agree with that.
It's interesting, though. Always.
I see what he means, but not necessarily.
That's how I'm going with my writing from now on.
Gonna be like Stephen King then. I mean, that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
Hey, oh, you're telling me that Stephen King will occasionally go on tangents, is what you're saying?
Oh, so this scene was the scene that Greg Farshty deemed non-canon, and it's because the joke is that Matau is hitting on Nokama, the green Toa is hitting on the blue Toa, and he had a whole strict thing where there was no romance allowed in Bionicle because they were not totally organic creatures, and he didn't want to get into sex stuff. But the movie makers put it in there because they wanted to add some humanity to the characters.
I see. I get both sides to that because of the implications of having any sort of sexuality, because these things are robots. So it's like, well, what the hell do they do then? How do you deal with that? But then on the other hand, I do like the humanity of it. It gives them. Otherwise they are just cold robots. But that is the point too. So I guess your mileage may vary on that sort of thing.
As someone who loves Short Circuit, I want to say that robots can have feelings.
That's kind of the difference.
Number 5 is alive.
You look at the movies, and the movies have like corny jokes, I think, in them, and like comic relief and stuff. But like it does feel a little more human by adding these elements and the romance in there. Mm-hmm. Whereas like the books kind of did away with a lot of that and made it more focused on like the broader character arcs and also the plot and mythology. And that was like maybe not like as cringeworthy at times with some of the silly stuff, but there was less humanity as a result.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, like, I think, get the stick out of your ass, buddy. No, I like as
we're actually gonna have him on for an interview. Wash, you better shut up.
Oh shoot. No, I get that feeling, but I think also, again, as someone who's never watched this, like, it didn't seem too kiddish or anything like that. I could see, like, when you said like you taking some of the like humor out to like not make it like cartoonish or whatever, even though it is cartoon. That I think it's still like that was subtle enough that it didn't like feel like we're doing like a Nickelodeon kids show like level goofiness. That's like, okay, he's half-ass hitting on her. That I think as a kid I might not even catch that as like a romantic thing. It didn't seem too bad personally.
It was in the last movie too with Jala, the red and yellow Matoran, and Holly, the blue Matoran.
Oh, the last one we watched, not like the literal last one, because I was gonna say no spoilers.
Oh no, yeah, I meant the first Bionicle movie.
God, could you imagine if we watched these backwards? I'd be somewhat more confused.
Yeah, the third movie takes place between the second to last scene, and the last scene of this movie, which takes place before the first film.
It's an interquel.
An interquel to a prequel.
Okay.
I feel like they had to be the first who could come up with that term. Remember when The Lion King 1.5 did that as well, but it sucked?
What? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What happened?
Lion King 1.5 did that. Actually, they didn't even go into the second
just doing
one.
anything he can to talk about something other than the movie.
No, I'm trying to bring it back to point out that this is better than what Disney was doing.
No, that was a point I did not think of, and I think it's a very good point, because there's like little technical things you can point out with the animation and like overall some storytelling flaws, but they're flaws of ambition, I find, which is strange to be saying for a merchandise-driven film.
I mean, you can get flaws in anything. And like Back to the Future 1, you can see the cable on Christopher Lloyd and like the clock tower scene and like shit like that. Where it's like any movie is going to have flaws. And like Citizen Kane has flaws in it, but it's like, yeah, it's not a half-ass like, you would see like on a Mystery Science Theater or a Red Letter Media reviewed movie where it's like, oh, what the fuck were they thinking? It's just like, mistakes happen, which is what my parents said about me.
Andrew, we can't focus on your trauma. We're trying to talk about Bionicle too.
Yeah. I like the hand. I don't know why I like it.
It's cool.
The animation on it is weird. I can't pinpoint like what about it feels weird. And I also joked here that I did not understand what was going on. I was like, what is he gonna like murder these two? And yeah,
that's what happens. He kills the two of them and the bird and uses the pieces to build the body that he has in the first movie. I think that came from the fact that Makuta for this year was not a set. You had to combine those 3 sets to build them. And I think that's where the idea came from.
probably.
Cha-ching.
Hey, it's how you fit your merchandise-driven stuff in there.
Yeah.
I actually
She was called.
yeah.
The set wasn't called Makuta though. It was called Ultimate Duma. I remember. So it was unclear to me that it was actually Makuta until the movie came
Guess
out.
they wanted it to be a sequel.
Okay, because looking on the Bionicle wiki, I saw 3 different types of Makuta, and I got very confused. There was Makuta something.
Jake's bringing up his phone.
But as he brings this up, that scene where they were coming charging down the pathway and then had to go off the side reminded me of Dexter's Lab ego trip in an unironic, great way.
So this scene here, I really like this moment where he's like, he realizes what's really happening with the Mask of Time and with Makuta, and all the visions are recontextualized, and he gets the bigger picture. I just think it doesn't make it quite clear enough what Makuta's real master plan is, which was to put all the Matoran into comas, wipe their memories, and then use the Mask of Time to shift time forward 1,000 years and wake them up and make them think that he was their savior.
Yeah, I just thought
It
the bad
kind
guy.
of tries to visually imply it, but
Yeah, I just thought the bad guy wanted time travel to like get to the future to do something, or go back in time to do something.
yeah. So he was going to use the mask to shift time forward.
Oh,
Were you
Makuta
able-
Pterodax?
You want things to get more confused?
No, we could.
That's his real name.
Okay,
So-
that's it. That's
'cause
it.
They later introduced many Makutas, and it turned out
Yeah.
there were hundreds of Makutas, and this Makuta from the movie's name was Pterodax, but he later killed all the other Makutas.
Okay, because I see Makuta species. I'm like, wait, what? and then I saw Makuta the Mask Hoarder.
That's what you call someone who owns
What
way
was
too many
his
Bionicles.
What was his actual name, or was that?
That just says Makuta the Mask Hoarder under the on the like this.
You got to screenshot that so I can put it up on the screen now. So, anyways, this scene, the robot toys are gonna go face off the.
This is from the Bionicle reboot.
Oh,
Because I was like, why don't I don't know this. That's the version of Makuta from the reboot they did.
Okay.
okay, and here's Makuta's reborn birth or whatever.
Oh, here's where Makuta gets theatrical. Gets the big arm movements going in.
There we go.
I love it.
Could you imagine like Orson Welles doing the voice of this instead of Transform? Like if Orson Welles lived a little longer, he would have done this voice too.
A little longer, more like 20 years. He'd been fucking life support.
They have him on like the drip feed, bringing him in through the voice.
I am.
It's just like what they did to the poor.
Toa.
It's just like they did to the poor bastard who played George Jetson in the Jetsons movie.
Didn't you say he was happy to do that though?
Okay, so context: the guy who voiced George Jetson, he voiced him since like the '60s. He was big in movies like in the '30s and '40s. So this guy was old by the time they did the movie. He had a massive stroke at some point. Had no memory, so they literally would just be like, "Hey, here's the line. Oh, Jane, stop this crazy thing," and then he would read it. And if they needed a second take, they would have to read it again because his like short-term memory was shot. And then he had a heart attack or another stroke in the animation booth or the recording studio booth, and died. And they said, "Oh, he died doing what he loved." It's like part of me believes that, but at the same time, part of me is like, "Oh my God, was his family exploiting him?" And they just like, "Yeah, he died doing what he loved. He totally wanted to be doing that." But anyways, back to Bionicle 2.
So we get our final confrontation here, which is actually pretty cool. And I like the stuff with the Mask of Time. And I just want to point out the music is once again really good in this movie. The Mask of Time theme is a standout for me, which only appears twice. This was one of the scenes. And the composer Nathan First, he did all 3 movies. All 3 are great, and he went on to do movies like Need for Speed and Act of Valor.
Oh, that's awesome. Because
Yeah.
with this movie, it never got released on like an official soundtrack, and then didn't it get lost on like a hard drive?
It did, and he somehow recovered it. 'Cause
Yeah.
you can actually buy them now. It's like the last piece of Bionicle media that's still officially for sale is the soundtrack for these movies.
Really?
Because he owns the rights to them, I guess. So he just
Oh.
released them himself.
Oh.
Wonder how Lego let that get through the cracks.
He's probably
I don't
doesn't
think they
at this
care.
point.
Yeah.
No, I meant like back in the day, like that they're like, "Oh yeah, you can keep the music rights to this."
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe he just asked for them. And they're like, oh, okay.
That could have
Or
been
it's
that
just
you could
like-
pay me less money if I get to keep them.
He just might have. It's yeah.
So I was insanely confused by this because they looked enough alike that in my we were drunk, or I was drunk by the time we got to this point. I was confused. I'm like, wait, what happened? And Jacob just said, "You'll see." And I'm like, what does that mean?
For the record, that means it took Was only an hour to get drunk.
Was was just waterfalling the entire time we were doing it.
I'm just like, why do I keep saying we should do this for my show?
If you drink more, the more you'll remember the names.
That's how I think they come up with the names. Okay, Johnny, take a few shots and then come up with names. Okay, there we go. Tala. No, give me a towel.
One thing they did when they tried making the names was they tried to use the letter K as much as possible, because K is the least used letter in the English alphabet. And so they wanted to make it seem more alien and unique. So
wait,
a lot
Z
of the names,
is used more?
Yeah, Z is used more.
Really?
Or it's
Yeah,
it's like
easy,
one of the, like look
lazy,
up a
okay.
dictionary sometime and like look up how many words start with K compared to other letters.
I'll take your
Interesting.
word for it. We're not in the early stages of quarantine where I would have done that.
Yeah, it was they focused on emphasizing K. Also, a lot of the initial Bionicle names were based on like Maorian names until they were sued over that. But I think we talked about that already.
Yeah. Well, I think also I remember reading, this now potentially the nerdiest thing, surprisingly, that George Eastman named the company Kodak because he thought it would be the easiest pronounce because people would be able to look at it and pronounce it. So maybe that's what their thought was. Oh, we use K's and people can pronounce that. They failed in this case, at least for me.
Oh, he just got his invisibility powers.
Yeah.
Much
Wow,
like
that's
George
neat.
Eastman.
That's nifty.
Yeah, good for him. Oh, you know what we didn't talk about? We didn't talk about the Wenua and the flashlight powers.
Oh. I mean, probably.
Wenua became the breakout star of the movie for us.
Talk about a guy who got the short end of the stick.
Well, because I even jokingly said, I'm like, what is one? Like, how funny it would be if like one of them got like really shitty powers, and Jacob just snickered. I'm like, oh, damn, what does that mean?
Well, it's like heart,
It is. It's like,
But then they
maybe-
revealed he had X-ray powers, which is cool. You should have led with
that's,
that.
That's just from the movie. He didn't have that in all the other media. He just had night vision.
This poor bastard.
he's the Hufflepuff of the Toa.
And he sounds like Sylvester Stallone too. That like makes it just a little funnier for me. The guy sounds like he's doing a Sylvester Stallone impression.
See, I just thought it was Frank Stallone. Like the guy's got to get work somehow.
It gets better in the next one. I just remember there's like a line where he says something like, "Well, that's what friends do." It sounds just like Rocky.
Yo, Toa.
How we get back to Metru Nui?
It almost sounded like Sylvester Stallone doing a Snagglepuss impression. But yeah, no, this fight scene is great. I will say this is like, even though I preferred the first movie, this whole fight scene was a lot of fun as he's like tricking him.
Yeah,
and,
it's
like,
clever.
Yeah.
It's not based on senseless action.
Or like a weird basketball like game, if I remember, or a lacrosse based game from the last one.
Oh yeah. Like,
Oh.
that was pretty bad.
I forgot.
That first one really falls apart in the third act. No, it's like clever use of the invisible mask power. Yeah.
And this is also one of the few movie climaxes where I could see the video game like level not having to differ too much. Like this screams like something like a video game. Like, okay, you gotta hide behind the thing and like keep tricking him to hit the rocks. It's like this would be a great video game.
Which is interesting because there wasn't a video game for this one.
Look,
they
not to-
really missed the boat.
Not to sound like an idiot, but wouldn't it be more simple if their powers were just in accordance to like the elements? Or do they have that?
They do.
Oh, okay.
Like, it really, like, it's just the mask powers. And that came from the fact that their original sets from 2001, they, like, just randomly gave them mask powers. Because they had, like, they were the small sets that year. And, like, just give the red Taraga invisibility power, we'll say that. And the black Taraga, he lives underground, so he has night vision. And then, little did they know, they had to come up with this whole movie about them 3 years later, and then they're like, we have to make that a central part of the characters now. So yeah.
So how about those Dodgers? And by Dodgers, I mean this guy dodging. Wrapped it back in.
Yeah, yeah.
We're just watching the
Yeah, we're
movie
just
at this
like
point.
engaged now. And this is where I see. I even like this. It's like they don't just like blast him and shoot him. It's like he
His own
gets-
hubris.
Yeah. E2 brutes.
I said like when we watch this is just like the end of Super Mario Brothers when fucking Aunt Petunia is just like lodged to the wall.
I just love that. That's 3.
Yeah, he's like just like a fly against the wall there.
That was the sound of the tool chest falling down the stairs.
God, could you imagine
Oh.
Daniel Stern as the voice of this? He's just
Hey,
doing
Toa,
the or doing
come on down here.
or Kevin from the Wonder Years grew up into being Makua.
Hey, Toa.
Harry.
No, they would be the voice of the Dark Hunters.
Oh,
You moron, Cracker! Get over there!
This is just turning into our impressions of stars from Home Alone.
It's turning into our bad impressions of the stars from Home Alone.
Well, that was implied. All right, who wants to do an impression of Kieran Culkin?
And there we go. They defeated Makuta, and he's frozen in a crystal cage.
They just kicked that can down the road a couple centuries.
Well, there'll be more in Bionicle 3, which I know you're both very excited about. Specifically, Andrew, to memorize the names.
I'm gonna have to like do something like from Harry Potter with like when he was writing and it's like I will not tell lies. It just keeps getting carved in his arm. That's what I'm gonna have to do, like carve the names into my arms to remember
You're gonna
them.
be like Mr. Zaz, but you're just carving names instead of like victims.
Bionicle names.
Could you imagine if like it came out he actually isn't,
Matau.
he isn't a very good murderer and like people are like, are those fake names? Lucy Ricardo? Like, are you just writing down what you were watching on TV today?
So the third movie takes place right after this.
Yes.
Okay.
When they have to go back and get the rest of the Matoran that are still inside.
And then finishes
the
right
building.
here.
Okay.
Yeah, because now there's like hundreds of them. It's about them going back to get everyone else.
I like the impression I got watching the movie. It was like, oh, we just don't need to see it because nothing important happened. But apparently, a semi-theatrically length adventure happened in between.
Even like
those
this
shots.
year, if you read the books, the events of this movie were one book. There were 5 books that year, I think. Yeah. And this is where we get our connection to the first movie, and we find out how it all comes together. Now, I don't know how I feel morally about the Turaga hiding the city from the Matoran all these years, but I think it's an effective ending nonetheless.
Sure.
Yeah. I like how like he automatically gets like a staff because he's an old man now. Like he wasn't holding one, but now he somehow has it. I guess it's
a wicked unibrow too.
I guess it's like the conservation of matter. Like, you know, he gets smaller. That matter had to go somewhere, so it became a walking stick.
Is very yeah. The great beings were very conscientious when they came up with that. Where if Toa turns into a Turaga, their tool turns.
I actually
into
like
a
this
walking
little
stick.
detail here where she feels her face. It's almost like, she's like, oh, I'm old now. There's a little bit of humanity
Yeah.
there. It's
It's-
like, oh, she lost her youth, or her powers, and it's
Yeah.
like a little moment of self-reflection. It's a nice touch.
You know, they had a hell of a week. You know, going
Yeah.
from like kids to gods to elderly people.
Are the Maturin kids?
I
No,
just
well, you
keep
know what it is?
referring to them as kids.
They're not kids, but Greg Farsley, I saw an interview with him, and he said they always subconsciously wrote him a little like the audience surrogate.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Now you'll see here, the character of Takua, who had the Matoran of the Blue Mask that just appeared. He was the protagonist from the first movie, and we actually have with us now the actor who voiced him, the online film Bionicle Anabolic Steroids PSA, which is currently trending at 160 views on YouTube.
Yeah, check out the link in the description. Yeah, I was that character's voice. Yeah, I feel very much like Orson Welles. It's like, what? I play a toy killing another toy, except no, I'm not going to give it away.
Andrew's already writing his autobiography, talking about how he regrets doing the role for me.
No, there's other roles I've done for you that are far more regrettable than this one. You had me record this. I can't even remember what commentary we were recording. We just kept the equipment up after the fact that you had me do this.
I didn't tell you what it was for.
No.
And yeah, we got our.
We got the logo.
Yeah.
So the
Some
logo.
Nice branding right there. No, I'm kidding.
So the logo actually gets explained to be a thing in universe later, and that's
Terry
a
Shakespeare.
spoiler. That's actually a spoiler for the fourth movie.
Okay.
Please tell me one of the Shakespeares was a writer on this. Was one of
No,
them.
I think they're the people that run Creative Capers, which
Where-
did that show Nightmare Ned.
Where do they live? We're there.
Don't dox them.
No, I mean, are they English?
I don't know if they are. I'm gonna look this up.
Okay.
Just the idea you're going to dox them right
No.
I mean, we could. no.
I just want to interview them.
Let me look up. Yeah, because
I find the closing credits really weird because it's like you can see visuals are behind it, but like it's all whited out. It's weird that they're not showing it.
Well, it's
Really,
like an
no.
effect in the background
Yeah.
there. It's
I
the credits
guess.
are the main point. That's
Kids don't care.
well, I got big news for you.
Do they live in Sherman Oaks?
I looked up Terry Shakespeare, and I'm familiar with Sue Shakespeare, who I know some of the animation stuff she did. I think weirdly enough, she was involved with like trying to get the Thief and the Cobbler finished. Terry Shakespeare was a producer on 101 Dalmatians, apparently. The live action one.
Oh God.
They did, they run an animation studio. What was the?
do they? That's interesting.
They used to work with. I want to say both of them used to work with Don Bluth because they were animators on like The Secret of Nim.
Yeah. But I thought that's like Christopher Guest is one of the voice characters.
Christopher Lambert.
Yeah, that would have been crazy.
We got Alessandro Giuliani from Battlestar Galactica and Smallville as the voice of Akama.
I was to say any relation to Rudy Giuliani.
Rudy Giuliani should have voiced Tarago Duma.
Guys, yeah, that's
Are you saying you're trying to put the Matoran in a coma? Of course I am.
America's mayor, everybody.
Metru Nui's mayor.
They're going to be at the Metru
Nui's
Nui.
Taraga.
They're going to be at the Metru Nui 4 seasons.
Meanwhile, there's like a bunch of late night hosts making fun of him at night. Taking embarrassing pictures of Taraga Duma and plastering all over the news.
That was oil coming down the side of his face at the press conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vaki have confirmed that they've searched Taraga Duma's house for any incriminating evidence of Makuta.
Well, you should do a Photoshop where you take off Rudy Giuliani's face and it's Makuta.
No, you take the shot of Makuta where he's like, he just took off Duma's mask and just put Rudy Giuliani's face there instead.
Well, that's up on the screen right now, guys. That's the thumbnail for the video. Well, this has been a great time. I love watching these movies. I have no idea what's going on half the time because I'm drunk when we're doing it, but it's great. I love them, and yeah.
Yeah, it's a thing where I wish I could like these more because they are interesting, but I don't think I can ever get these fucking names right. And I don't think there's ever hope for me to really like engage with this as like someone like you, Jacob. But I want to.
The ship
It
has
says a
sailed.
lot. It's kind of like, as a kid, I started from 2001, and slowly the world was opened up for me. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like with you, Jake and Boss, like someone's telling you to jump out of the plane and skydive into the Pacific Ocean without a parachute.
Yeah, well, it's like it's like following Star Wars, trying to follow but without seeing the movies. You're just reading like the EU stuff, and my God, I'm talking about like pre-Disney.
Talking like Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's like that, and forget
Yeah,
it.
the Palpatine surgical
Reconstruction center.
Yeah, no, I think, and I think we've discussed Bionicle 2, but I think in terms of why it became kind of inaccessible, we've sort of nailed it here. Not just the story becoming more complicated, because as we know with comics, that does not need to be a be-all, end-all. It certainly didn't help, though, but it is the fact that there wasn't a very centralized way of exploring the story.
Well, it's funny because with the reboot, I was reading that the whole idea was to simplify the mythology, and then that ended up getting criticized. And I thought, well, simplifying the mythology wasn't necessarily the solution. I think it was just too little, too late.
I think it was they needed to find a streamlined way to tell it, kind of like you said, like a centralized way of getting the whole thing across.
Yeah, but by that point, Bionicle had been out for so long. It was just.
Are you talking about the reboot?
In 2014.
Oh, that was like a total reboot.
That's what I mean, though, where it was more simplified and everything. But
that was like a Batman Begins style thing.
Yeah. I don't think the solution is to try to simplify the mythology. The solution should have been to.
Find a way to deliver.
Well, they missed the mark. I think in like the early 2000s, that was really the only way they could have done it. Because the whole point of I know it's the end, but the whole point of these things, if you watch something like a movie or a TV show, that incentivizes you to go out and search for like the supplementary material, and that can add to, and that furthers the engagement, as opposed to just getting lost with the minutia of everything and all these disparate platforms. But
I think the movies were meant to be that, but even that I don't think was enough. I think like a TV show would have been the ideal format for something like this. Even if it was like, I imagine a Bionicle TV show in like the early 2000s, and it would have looked like Beast Wars or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Or like this.
I mean, ideally, it would have looked like this.
I don't think you could have had the budget to do that.
It would have been like corny and cheesy. And so there's a part of me that's thankful that we got what we did, because I appreciate what they achieved. But I think in terms of like staying power, what you're suggesting, Jake, would have been the right move.
I still think you could have had all those things, though. It's like any successful franchise. That's what they're based around, It just, I think there was just a misstep with this.
Yeah.
And it was its undoing in the end.
Well,
at least that's my opinion. I don't know. Maybe we could go further into. We could maybe talk about that with the third movie, but
yeah.
Fortunately, the movie was only 75 minutes long, so we will not have the time to continue to talk about this, because I find it fascinating.
Maybe we'll just do a discussion video where we're not confined by a running time.
We'll do that once, maybe after we do the third one. But it just is fascinating to me that this franchise had such high level of storytelling prowess for a merchandise-driven franchise, but is pretty much forgotten now.
Yeah,
it's like got a cult audience when it was
very
popular.
And it was it pretty much brought Lego out of. They were almost at the end there in like the 90s, and this brought them back.
It was basically single-handedly supporting Lego in the early 2000s.
Yep.
2003 was a huge loss leader for Lego, because that was the year. I want to say that was the year there wasn't a Harry Potter or Star Wars movie, and those were like their other two big lines at that point. And Bionicle basically was single-handedly supporting them at that point.
Oh wow!
It was like a cash cow. Well. And then it was after that year, starting with this, that we saw the slow decline of Bionicle, but it was very slow because it was still very successful at this point.
Well, it had been until like 2006. Isn't that when like the first line ended or something?
Yeah, it lasted until 2010, and then they rebooted it in 2015.
Okay,
there you go.
Well, we should probably
wrap
it up.
Yeah, well, we hope you enjoyed our look into Bionicle 2. The search for Curly's gold.
The search for Krekka's gold.
There we go. So, yeah, have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Unity, duty, and flashlight powers.
Yeah.